At a glance, Sichuan could pass for a small carrier, but she isn't. Yeah, she's got a flat top, a catapult for launching aircraft, and a couple of towers, but she is no carrier. She's an amphibious assault vessel, a very different type of ship indeed, one designed not to contest airspaces, but beaches. And there's more too, because she isn't just any amphibious assault vessel, she's a totally new spin on the concept, a full rewiring of what the term even means and represents. Because whereas most such ships strike a careful blend between marines, launchers, and helicopters to get them ashore, Sichuan, the first Type 076 class, has her marines, helicopters, and launchers, yes, but then throws a new ingredient heavily into the mix. Drones. Really big ones. The kind that need catapults to get into the sky. Is she any good? That's a question to which the answer is we don't know. She was only launched in December 2024, and we still only have speculative dates for her final commissioning. But here's what we do know. Today's episode of Mega Projects is brought to you by the good people over at Vessi. Look, Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals are everywhere, most of them. I know they're a bit shit these days, aren't they? But this one from Vessi is actually worth your time because Vessis are the most fantastic shoes you'll ever wear. And indeed, they are currently running their biggest sale of the year. I've been wearing the Stormburst high tops, fully waterproof, super comfortable, built for whatever winter throws at you, and they're fantastic. Actually, not these specific ones. These are the Stormburst high tops, but I have a pair of white ones, which I typically wear, which I'm not actually wearing today. But they are a wonderful pair of shoes, and even though they're white, you can wash them off so easily, so they actually stay white, which is nice, because they're waterproof. You can just water them down, and the dirt is gone, which is nice. Plus, they slip on easy, even though they kind of look like a proper boot. They do. You just pop them on real easy, and they're just the perfect shoe. And like I say, they're waterproof. They're perfect for this time of year when it's a little bit wet outside. So one of Vessi's best deals of the year is happening right now. 25% off site-wide and up to 55% off select styles. Head to Vessi.com, grab yours before they're gone. And now back to today's episode. From 071 to 076. Okay, so if you want to understand why China's new Type 076 exists at all, and given that you clicked on this video, we're going to assume that you do, you need to wind the clock back 2 decades. Back to when the People's Liberation Army Navy, the PLAN, really was struggling with something most Western fleets had mastered back in the black and white days. Getting soldiers off ships and onto beaches without, getting them all killed. Basically, for years, as the PLAN ever modernized following the ascension of Deng Xiaoping as premier in 1978, its amphibious wing lagged behind and remained the runt of the litter, and noticeably so. As Taiwan's National Defense and Security Research dryly put it, the service, quote, lacked experience in modern amphibious operations, and its ships were still operating at World War II levels of capability, well into the 1990s. That, however, began to change in 2005, big time. Then, under the new guidance built around multi-dimensional rapid landing and deep penetration strikes, the PLAN greenlit its first proper modern landing platform dock, the Type 071. The lead ship, Kunlun Shan, hit the drink in 2006, the first of a class of 8 plus a cheeky extra one for the Thai Navy that was pretty competent, all things considered. A 20,000-ton vessel able to haul 700 Marines, 20 armored vehicles, and 4 Z-8 helicopters across blue water. Not an elegant solution, admittedly, but it certainly did the job, and it represented a huge leap in capabilities. As People's Daily, the official newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party, correctly noted, the Type 71 also raised a few eyebrows Washington's way. Not so much just for their capabilities, but for what they represented. Quote, the strengthening of China's long-range power projection system and its shift from platform-based to system-based operations. End quote. I.e., they were now starting to take amphibious warfare real serious-like. And indeed, take it seriously they did, because before the Type 71 class had even been finished, the last one, Qilan Shan, having been commissioned in 2020, work began on a class of even greater vessel still, the Type 75 landing helicopter dock. First laid down in 2017 with the lead ship Hainan, this shifted capabilities way more towards aircraft, with facilities to operate up to 30 helicopters specifically, and more broadly introduce a proper vertical landing doctrine that the PLAN had simply not possessed before. In fact, this is exactly why they look suspiciously like light aircraft carriers, because save for the fact that what flies off them have twirly bits on top rather than fixed wings, they're not far off. Although do note they do still carry amphibious troops too, somewhere in the region of 800 troops and around 60 armored vehicles. But even then, with 4 75s being commissioned in all, Guangxi, Anhui, Hubei, and of course Hainan, it still was not enough. Because even before Hubei, the last of the class, commissioned in August 2025, the PLAN wanted more still, something that could deliver troops and helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. Thus, the Type 76, our ship of focus today, was authorized as a new quality combat power platform in 2023. And despite Type 76 being a class designation, we're going to keep referring to it in the singular today because we flatly just have no idea how many they plan on building. This isn't because of research on our part either. Wikipedia doesn't have any information, so we'll give up sort of thing. No. We went through probably 12 Chinese language sources from both Chinas to put this together, and not one of them gave us even so much as a hint of how many Beijing plans on building. So yeah, we just legit don't know. As for the immediate question, that being, what is the 76 besides a 75 that can also do fixed-wing aircraft? Well, put a pin in that thought for now, because we have a more fundamental matter to get out of the way before we start addressing that. And that said matter is, as the title card just gave away, what even is an amphibious assault vessel? Also, more broadly, what are all the other ship types that we mentioned in the last chapter, as well as some other related types that we've yet to mention? And as it turns out, the answer to that question basically is yes, because an amphibious assault vessel is basically any ship that is designed to carry soldiers, tanks, and helicopters across the ocean and then plonk them on the bad guy's coastline to shoot up the place a bit. And that presents a problem though, because that definition is so broad that it includes ships as diverse as the Type 72A, which we haven't met yet, as well as the Type 71, Type 75, and Type 76, which we have. Correspondingly, amphibious assault vessel can be more specific still, depending on exactly how it gets those troops to shore, because over the years, navies have tried just about every way possible. The most literal is the LST, or Landing Ship Tank. These are the spiritual descendants of the D-Day barges. Blunt-nosed, box-shaped monsters that drive right up to the beach, drop the ramp, and let the tank roll straight on into the fight. The Type 72A does exactly that, displacing about 4,800 tons, space for 10 tanks and 250 troops, and the hydrodynamic grace of a brick. It does the job, and that's all you can say about it in terms of flattery. Next comes the LPD, or Landing Platform Dock, a more sophisticated approach. Instead of beaching itself, it parks offshore and opens a floodable well dock out of the back so landing craft or hovercraft and the like can sail out onto their own power. The Type 71 would be one of these, and indeed, the particularly eagle-eared will remember us referring to it as exactly that in the last chapter, essentially a floating garage with a helicopter pad on the roof. And then there's the LHD, or the Landing Helicopter Dock, which takes the same idea and sticks a full flight deck across the top. This would be what the Type 75 would class as 40,000 tons, space for 30 helicopters, and the ability to land hundreds of troops vertically rather than just crashing them into the surf. And finally, there's the LHA, or Landing Helicopter Assault Ship, an aviation-optimized big-deck amphib designed from the outset to operate short takeoff and vertical landing fixed-wing jets such as the American F-35B, alongside large helicopter contingents. Some variants also include a well dock, others trade it for expanded aviation spaces. And just to be clear, because they can look rather similar, aircraft carriers don't actually sit on this ladder at all, at least not officially. Carriers exist to project air power, not amphibious power. Their job is to seize control of the sky, keep it, and then blow stuff up from it, launching fighters often from hundreds of kilometers away to do so. And amphibious ships, to repeat ourselves, exist to land things: troops, vehicles, helicopters, and to support them once they're ashore. They're two very similar and overlapping worlds, we know, but if we're being pedantic, they are definitely different. The US blurred it first with the America-class, the first amphibious ship built from the keel to sacrifice some of its amphibious side for aviation capacity, and now China's doing it again with the Type 76. So, hope you're all following. I know it's a lot of word soup, but it is soup that is easily digested once it's actually explained. So, let's get back to the video proper. What we know so far. It was the morning of the 27th of December 2024, and the fog over Shanghai had a cold metallic hue that made the river look like poured steel. Sirens echoed across the Hudong Zhonghua dockyard, banners cracked in the wind, and in the middle of it all, the 260-meter-long slab of grey metal began to move as it was launched for the very first time. Said slab, of course, was the Type 76, and having named the Sichuan, a bottle of champagne was smashed against her bow, a red ribbon unfurled down her flank, and a brass band struck up with its go-to song, the People's Liberation Army Navy March. Cameras flashed, drones buzzed, and the assembled crowd roared in a chorus of applause and chants. And frankly, they had plenty of reason to be celebrating, because the Sichuan, no matter how you cut it, was shaping up to be a serious vessel, one that even by the standards of modern Chinese shipbuilding marked a new leap in ambition. As Xinhua News would later write, it was a key component of the Navy's transformation and modernization, integrating amphibious and fixed-wing aviation capabilities on a single platform. That's official speak for this thing is unlike anything the PLAN has ever built. And they weren't wrong in such an assessment either, because not only was she the first landing helicopter assault ship that China has ever built, but she was visibly different from their other flat-top ships too. The first thing that stood out, even to casual observers, was the twin island configuration. Two separate superstructures, rising from the flight deck, spaced far apart like bookends. CCTV, that being China's state broadcaster, not their security cameras, described the layout as a, quote, dual bridge arrangement to separate navigation and aviation command, explaining that one island controlled the ship while the other ran air operations. Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research agreed with that assessment too, so we don't just have to take Beijing's word for it, with them stating in a 2024 brief that the twin island configuration, quote, reflects a deliberate separation of navigation and aviation command functions, mirroring the layout of full-sized carriers, and that the 76's internal design retains a vestigial well dock for limited amphibious vehicles, but its interior spatial allocation clearly prioritizes aviation support and drone maintenance infrastructure. End quote. In other words, even Taiwan's own defense analysts, hardly prone to echoing Beijing's talking points, saw the same thing, a ship conceived less as a beach landing platform and more as a self-contained aviation hub. This same bias towards the aviation side of things could be seen beneath the flight deck too, as Sichuan has two continuous hangar decks running almost the full length of the hull. The upper one aligned with catapult track and elevator wells, the lower one packed with workshops, drone bays, and power conduits. And of course, she does still retain capabilities for landing troops. The well dock is still there technically. It's a narrow echo of what the 75s have, but as Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research noted, it's, quote, retained for limited amphibious craft, i.e. it's completely a secondary capability. The real payload now lives above the waterline, in hangars, bright with hydraulic cranes and maintenance rigs built for machines that never touch the sea, not unless something has gone oh so very wrong. This new weighting towards aerial capabilities demanded a new nervous system too, and whereas the 71s and 75s relied on mechanical drives and hydraulic linkages, think pistons, pumps, and old-school shafts physically connecting every moving part, Sichuan swaps all of that for a fully integrated medium-voltage DC electrical grid, basically one giant circuit board running the length of the ship where power isn't tied to any single engine but can be redirected anywhere at will. The system, a derivative of research by Yang Yayu's team at Shanghai Jiao Tong University, we've never heard of him, but our Taiwanese source definitely seemed to think he was a big deal, gives the ship the flexibility of a data center rather than a factory floor. The same surge that pushes a propeller today could, in theory, fling an aircraft tomorrow. And we do mean fling aircraft, as the single electromagnetic catapult installed on the port side of the Sichuan's flight deck is a scaled-down cousin of the ones installed aboard the Fujian, powered by the same underlying principle of magnets, not steam. And that's an important distinction too, because not all catapults are created equal. The older generation, the kind you'd find on Cold War-era American carriers and older British ones before they caught a terrible case of poverty and couldn't afford them anymore, used steam to do the heavy lifting. Huge boilers feeding compressed vapor into pistons that dragged an aircraft down a track at brutal all-or-nothing speed. It works, yeah. But it is crude, maintenance-hungry, and about as gentle on the airframe as being rear-ended by a freight train. Steam systems waste heat too. They lose pressure over distance and can only deliver power in one fixed surge, which means that naval types invariably have to plan really carefully to make sure that the planes they fling off their flight decks are heavy enough to survive the kick, but light enough to actually get airborne afterwards, which invariably limits what can actually be launched. Electromagnetic catapults, by contrast, ditch the plumbing entirely. Instead of vapor and valves, they use a moving magnetic field to pull a metal shuttle smoothly along the deck, its acceleration finely tuned by the ship's computers. Think of it less of a slingshot and more as a magnetic conveyor belt that can throw things into the sky. The advantages are obvious: consistent power, far less stress on aircraft, faster reset times, and crucially, the ability to dial the launch force up or down depending on what's being thrown off the deck. For a ship like the Sichuan, which will be juggling comparatively fragile drones, that precision matters. It's also quieter, cleaner, and more efficient as a cheeky bonus too, and because it draws power straight from the ship's electrical grid rather than steam lines, it can feed off whatever energy source the engineers decide to bolt in next. But, and this is a big but, there's a reason that as of the present, steam catapults remain the go-to globally, and that's because the electromagnetic kind, while clever, still come with baggage of their own. As Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research rather succinctly put it, the system aboard Sichuan represents a technological leap ahead of the vessel that bears it. They note that while the magnetic launch rail itself may be cutting edge, its power supply almost certainly isn't. The catapult's appetite for electricity is colossal, and as they caution, quote, stable voltage and sufficient reserve capacity remain unverified on a conventionally powered hull. Put more bluntly, if you're running propulsion, sensors, and flight ops all at once and powering it all off of good old-fashioned explosive jungle juice rather than a nuclear reactor, something, in all likelihood, has to give. They also highlight the simple fact that magnets don't love the ocean. Quoting again, temperature and humidity sensitivity could reduce efficiency at sea. Nothing if not an academic way of saying that saltwater condensation and delicate electronics are not natural friends. Maintenance, however, could prove to be the real enemy. As they describe electromagnetic systems as, quoting again, high-precision and maintenance-intensive equipment requiring continuous calibration and trained technicians, and noted that China's experience with such gear remains almost entirely theoretical. They have a point too, as the only other vessel China has that uses them is the Fujian, and despite having been launched all the way back in 2022, she still has yet to be commissioned. In fact, Sichuan is only the third vessel period to have electromagnetic catapults, with Fujian being the second and the American Gerald R. Ford being the first, having been commissioned back in 2017. So it isn't a stretch to say that they remain basically theoretical for just about everybody at this point. Moving beyond just the catapults, though, it's also worth highlighting how her fancy new configuration makes Sichuan quite the stocky girl compared to her Sino sisters, displacing around 40,000 tons as compared to 35,000 tons for a Type 75 and 25,000 tons for a Type 71. We think around 40,000 anyway. The Center for Strategic and International Studies normally bang on with their claims as they are, but not based in China as they aren't, gave a figure of 50,000 in a 2024 report. But every Chinese outlet, Xinhua News, People's Daily, CCTV Military, South China Morning Post, gave a figure of 40,000. We, of course, ultimately have no idea which is correct. It's not like we have the Sichuan to hand to weigh it, and so we'll just give you both figures and do with that what you like. But do note that the 50,000 figure, if true, would make her the largest amphibious ship currently afloat, beating out the America class by around 5,000 tons or so. Her bulk, whatever it ends up actually being, is also explained by her secondary systems. Radar, for example, which can be clearly seen studding her superstructure. China itself doesn't tell us exactly what systems she's packing. About the closest you get to a statement on that matter is something like this, which we pulled from a Global Times article, quoting, "Type 76 amphibious assault ship brings together the best of the Navy's advanced warships, integrating the radars of destroyers and frigates, the Fujian aircraft carrier's electromagnetic catapults, and the concepts of the Type 75, accordingly boosting its combat power." End quote. And it goes on, so on and so forth. But worry not, friends, because we applied a bit of being a massive nerd to this stuff, and we happened upon this, the Type 54B frigate. It's brand new, with the PLAN currently only having one, Lu Ho, in commission, and another, Qinzhou, launched pending commissioning. And have a look up top. The twirly triangle bit towards the front and the bulgy mast bit staggered behind is pretty close, isn't it? And so we believe that we found our match. Unfortunately, China hasn't given us a name for that one either. So, well, moving on to protection. And on this point, mercifully, we actually have some specifics. As the Global Times reported, the Sichuan, quote, possesses strong close-in defensive capabilities, including at least 3 HQ-10 air defense missile launchers, at least 3 Type 1130 close-in weapon systems, and 4 32-tube defensive rocket launchers. End quote. The same report added that, quoting again, the defensive rocket launchers on Chinese warships can be loaded with decoy rounds, rockets filled with chaff, and active decoys equipped with small radio frequency jammers, and can also fire rockets carrying small depth charges for attacking submarines and divers. End quote. And all of that makes for an interesting arrangement, because from that, we can deduce some things about how she intends to be used. For a start, the named weapons are squarely point defense. HQ-10s, 1130 Gatlings, and those 32-tube rocket launchers. They buy you a lethal close-in bubble and a versatile soft-kill/anti-submarine warfare trick box, but they are not suitable for area air defense. So operationally, it's reasonable to speculate the Sichuan is designed to plug into a wider layered defense, use its sensors and data links to see far, and track escorting destroyers and cruisers, the Type 55 and 52D families, which then shoulder the long-range SAM and area defense burden. A second implication is tactical posture. A ship optimized for heavy drone and helicopter operations with robust close-in weapon systems and decoy arrays is most useful operating close enough to contested littoral zones to launch vertical and unmanned assaults while relying on a protective screen for deep strike threats. That makes sense if the PLAN is thinking about high-tempo, multi-domain amphibious operations and grey zone coercion. Lots of drones, lots of sensors, and a protective ring provided by the task group. And yes, given geopolitics of late, and indeed of the last 80 years, we'd be willing to bet a kidney on exactly which littoral zone in particular they're thinking it might end up seeing some use in. That of the other China, Taiwan. The drone carrier. Now let's zoom in on the Sichuan's drone carrier aspect, because actually this is a very, very big deal, and an interesting one at that, so we'd be doing a disservice if we just skimmed over it as one of many design features. And it isn't just a new gimmick bolted onto an old classification of vessel, it's a total keel-up rethink of what an amphibious assault vessel even is. For the better part of a century, with the concept originating with the Imperial Japanese Shinzumaru commissioned in 1934, they've been vessels that effectively extend a beachhead, taking troops that need to get within shooting range of the enemy so that they could do something about their being alive and push ever on, expediting their initial deployment and supporting it therefrom, i.e., everything about them supports people, and the machines aboard are just a vector for facilitating that. But Sichuan turns that logic on its head, for her machines are the main event, and her people are secondary there too. Huge amounts of her innards are hangars and workshops for drones. Her elevators lift carbon fiber and circuit boards, not sweating infantry or crates of rations. The catapult that runs along her port side isn't tuned for troop-carrying tilt rotors, it's tuned for pilotless aircraft light enough to launch by magnetism alone. Make no mistake though, she is very much still an amphibious assault vessel despite the heavy weighting towards drones. She still has capacity for Marines, more than 1,000 of them, at least according to a Xinhua news wrap-up, which is a serious number but notably less than the 1,700-ish that an America class has, and still has capacity for helicopters and landing craft. Not that we know exactly which one she'll have, but our money is on things like the Type 726 hovercraft and Z-18 and Z-20 helicopters. the usual, basically, as there's been no announcements of anything special in the works for just Sichuan and her presumably eventual sisters. But what she is not, however, is unique. China are far from the only nation to be playing around with the vague general ships but also drones concept. They've just taken it further, faster, and with more conviction than anyone else. The others nibble, China bites. Take Turkey's TCG Anadolu as an example. She began life as a standard helicopter carrier, a near copy of Spain's aircraft carrier/landing helicopter dock combo, Juan Carlos I, in fact, and accordingly had originally been intended to operate F-35Bs until Ankara found itself with a small body courtesy of Uncle Sam's firm striking hand after they were a bit too nice to the Russians, got carried away, and bought themselves some S-400 surface-to-air missile systems, and while they found themselves kicked off the F-35 program in 2019. This was nothing if not quite the kerfuffle for Turkey, because that very same year Anadolu launched and now would have nothing serious to shove in her hangars at all. How fortunate then that Turkey just so happens to be quite the major player in the drone world. So, well, bish bash bosh, a bit of fettling here, a bit of tinkering there, and easy. The Anadolu was then operating as an amphibious assault vessel with Bayraktar TB3s and Kizalimas instead, as well as a few Seahawk and Super Cobra helicopters. See what we mean though? It was a low-key, genius solution from Ankara, all things considered, but it was ultimately exactly that, a solution, a blag, a bodge. Not an intentional idea from the keel up, an improvisation born of political necessity. Sichuan was the first girl that Beijing asked to the prom, and Anadolu is the girl who Ankara begrudgingly asked after stealth profile Stacy had turned them down. It's the same for Iran too, as instead of coming up with something new, Tehran's Revolutionary Guard simply took what it already had, big, tired merchant hulls, and turned them into what it now calls drone carriers. You'll know the ones: IRIS, Shahid Madavi, and Shahid Bagheri, long, boxy, unmistakably civilian silhouettes that look more at home hauling containers than conducting warfare. A flight deck welded onto the stern, a scatter of pads for helicopters, racks for loitering munitions bolted along the rails, and voila, a floating drone dump capable of launching Shahids by the dozen. And to be fair, it does the job Iran needs doing. These conversions aren't about finesse, they're about reach. They let Tehran move its cheap expendable UAVs thousands of kilometers from home and still have something that looks vaguely naval for the evening news. No catapults, no arresting gear, no clever hangar tricks, not even any marines, as these are just pure carriers rather than amphibious assault vessels, just a long, flat deck for mischief at sea. It works, and that's about all that can be said about that. And then there's Japan, which is taking a quieter, more evolutionary role. Its Izumo-class helicopter-carrying escort ships, so called because Japan and having airplane ships is still a touchy subject thanks to World War II, Izumo and Kaga are already mid-conversion into de facto light carriers with F-35Bs. But alongside those jets, the Japanese are quietly making room for drones. The Ministry of Defense's Acquisition Technology and Logistics Agency, or ATLA, launched a formal proof-of-concept program for ship-launched drones, inviting domestic manufacturers to demonstrate vertical takeoff and recovery systems that can operate from destroyer or carrier decks. The idea is to give the Japanese Navy persistent reconnaissance and strike coverage without depending solely on manned aircraft. That work is already feeding into procurement too. In 2024, the JMSDF selected the VBAT, a tail-sitting vertical takeoff drone built by Shield AI and Northrop Grumman as its first maritime drone. Trials aboard surface escorts are underway, and the long-term plan is to roll the same capability across larger decks such as Izumo and Kaga once the manned aircraft integration is complete. Adler has also commissioned studies on pairing these drones with new shipborne data link networks, hinting that the eventual goal is a mixed manned and unmanned flight group rather than a single-purpose carrier air wing. So yeah, loads of nations are at it, and they're all coming at it from different angles. Some, like Japan, are easing their way in with quiet upgrades and dual-use decks. Others, like Turkey and Iran, are improvising with what they've got, hammering the future onto whatever holes are laying around. And then there's China, which has skipped the half measures and drawn the next chapter straight onto the slipway. So where's that leave us? Well, it leaves us staring at what just might be the next great leap in naval warfare. Sichuan's decks look familiar, but her purpose isn't. She's a ship where the Marines are passengers, the drones are the frontline warriors, and the catapult is the keyboard that launches them. She isn't about storming beaches, she's about owning the sky above them before a single boot even gets wet, and consequently striding to victory. If it works, Sichuan will redraw the lines of Amphibious doctrine, turning the landing force into a network rather than a convoy. If it doesn't, it still sets the benchmark for every navy that follows, because from this point on, no one can design a big deck amphib without asking how it talks to drones or what happens when the aircraft on board stop needing pilots. Thank you for watching.